All right, so today we're going to go through Chapter 8, Performance Management and Appraisal. This should be 3 videos. Hopefully none of the videos are more than 10 minutes, so you can stop and pause in between videos in lieu of the in-person lecture we would normally have in class. One thing I do want to mention with this chapter is we're going to cover mainly the first half of the chapter. There's a second part of the chapter that goes through different companies like Adobe and goes through some of the ways that they do performance appraisals. We don't need to know any of that for our class. I don't want you to have to learn all those different companies' systems, especially because the book is a few years old and it's very likely those systems have changed anyway in the time being. So let's talk about performance management and appraisal. We're only going to briefly talk about performance management in this chapter because we sort of touch on it on lots of different chapters. But performance management is the very broad process of helping to improve people in your workplace. So things like learning and development, which we just went through, policies like having a succession plan where we identify talent and help build them over their careers. Things like what we're going to learn today, performance appraisal and giving feedback to employees to improve their performance. These interventions are designed to improve performance, so it's really anything that helps employees learn how they're doing and then how they can do it better in the workplace. So it can include lots of different things. Performance appraisal, however, is just one little part of performance management, and it's that process that employers usually do periodically. In all the places I've ever worked, it's been annually. If you're a newer employee, your performance appraisal, you might have more like probationary appraisal, so they might be more often, but usually once or twice a year is about what most places do. And it evaluates employees based on the requirements of their job. So that's why we need these job descriptions we've talked about throughout the semester to see how employees are doing, to evaluate how they're doing, and then how they can improve. We can also use performance appraisal information for things like compensation and benefits if we want to increase people's salaries, for example, if we have merit pay, which we'll talk about in later weeks, or if we want to promote someone, for example, we can use performance appraisal information for that. And this is not in our book, but I just wanted to show you performance appraisal is just one part of performance management. Our book doesn't really describe the performance management, like what all that entails, but here's a really good look at what things are part of that. So things like planning and goal setting with employees, which could be part of your performance review meeting, but isn't part of the formal performance evaluation that we're going to talk about today. You can have performance monitoring, development, and then rewards and recognition as well. So performance appraisals, as I mentioned, are usually done annually or semi-annually, but a lot of companies are transitioning to doing ongoing feedback and coaching, meaning that supervisors, as they work with their employees, are giving regular feedback when they see something or when they have an idea, and instead of doing like these periodic appraisals. For employees, this is good because more immediate feedback is easier to actually implement, but also it makes the employee understand much better what they're doing and what they could be improving if you give that feedback much more immediately. It also makes it so that supervisors aren't having to collect information over the year and then try to remember everything that they've seen over a year, or if you have semi-annual ones, even over a 6-month period from that employee to talk about their performance. You're doing it in the moment, which is much easier for supervisors as well. This does require that supervisors have very good soft skills because you're going to want to be able to approach employees and then talk to them immediately about what they're doing, which you need to learn how to be a supportive supervisor then to give feedback that can be used by employees. So we have lots of different kinds of assessors. The first and the most traditional kind is supervisors. So people who are often the hiring managers for different employees if the employee was hired under that with that job, but are the people supervising those employees. They're good assessors because they know what the requirements are of the job. They have the job descriptions. They may have even been part of the process of writing those. The bad thing is supervisors, and some of you have probably already had this experience in your jobs or internships, often don't work directly with their employees or don't spend a large amount of time with their employees at work because they have other tasks to do. So they may not see all of the things an employee does to assess their performance. And so sometimes we use other people in the workplace or even outside of the workplace to assess an employee's performance. So we can have people like subordinates. If that employee is actually a supervisor for some other employees, we can get a sense of what their leadership style is and things that they could improve in communicating with their employees from their subordinates. Although, of course, if it's not anonymous, subordinates may be very wary of putting too much negative or very direct feedback in case their name is attached to that feedback. You can also have peers who work with employees give feedback. That can be really useful because peers could be working with employees in very different ways than supervisors or subordinates might. And so they might have a clearer picture of what's happening on the day to day. This is especially helpful too if you work in a workplace where your work is organized by teams, that you can have peers from different teams talking about your an employee's contribution on each of those teams. You can also use customer feedback, especially if one of your values or one of your a focus of your employees should be customer satisfaction. This can be useful feedback. The bad thing is sometimes customers don't realize how their feedback's being used. So they may actually change the way that they would respond if they knew that this was going to be used for employee feedback. Also, customers only have like one small interaction or a very small amount of time with a particular person, even if they're a client of an employee, they may not know the full extent of what that employee does, and so their feedback is very limited in range of all of the things that an employee might do as part of their job. Self-appraisals are very common. Every time I've ever had an evaluation, I've had a self-appraisal. Usually, if you do a self-appraisal, the employee will appraise themselves with their own job description or the rating sheet that the supervisor or whomever else is going to use. And they'll do that ahead of time. And then when they meet with their supervisor, they'll talk about their own ratings and the supervisor's ratings to talk about any discrepancies. And then this really helps employees to kind of think about how what their performance has been and to communicate with their supervisors where they'd like to improve, where they see the need for improvement, and also to be kind of more engaged in the process as well. We also have 360-degree feedback. Some companies do this. I've never worked for a company that has done this, but it is common, especially in very large organizations. And let me show you what that looks like. The 360 degrees refers to the degrees within a circle. So a whole circle is 360 degrees. And the idea is that you're getting feedback from lots of different people who work with an employee to get information about different aspects of the employee's performance. So you can have people in top management who may not be that person's supervisor, but maybe the supervisor of above them or other leaders who might work with them in different ways. The actual supervisor, which is very common. Peers, again, peers across different teams is also very helpful. Subordinates, self, and customers. So it's actually combining all of those people into a performance appraisal. There will be different weights for different people's or different actors' input. So an immediate supervisor probably will have the most weight in terms of that appraisal for that employee because that's their job, and they also are much more familiar with what the employee is doing. And then maybe top management will be really important, peers will be important, but maybe customers would be less so, for example. So it depends on how the system is set up within the organization, how this 360-degree feedback gets fed back into the employee. The other thing with this kind of performance appraisal is usually the feedback from all of these actors is anonymous. So the employee can't know exactly which peer, for example, or which colleague or maybe even which customer gave feedback, which could be good or bad because it could be helpful in the sense that people know their comments are anonymous. They'll be more direct and more truthful, but it also means, and you've probably seen this on social media, when people are anonymous, they sometimes get nasty and give feedback that's not very helpful. So you have to balance them a little bit as well when you do this kind of feedback.